Global Insight News.
Today's Insight.
3 killed, including teacher and student, in shooting at Wisconsin Christian school.
But what does it mean? Who's involved? And how will it shape the world we live in? Join us as we break it all down and dive deeper than the surface. This is where facts meet clarity and you get the full story. You're watching Global Insight News, your source for the latest news, insights, and deep dive discussions.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking at a really tough topic, a school shooting that just happened at Abundant Life Christian School. It's in Madison, Wisconsin. And we're getting all of our information from a BBC News article that was published just a few hours ago. So this is very fresh information. And some of the details are pretty intense. We've got a teacher and a student and the suspect, who is also a student at the school, all dead. And then there are others who are injured as well.
It's just devastating, you know. And unfortunately, this has become a really chillingly familiar headline. Here in the U.S., the K-12 school shooting database actually shows that we've had over 300 school shootings just this year alone in 2024. And it's, you know, the impact really goes way beyond just numbers. Each one of those incidents leaves a trail of trauma and heartbreak in its wake.
Yeah. So let's kind of break down the timeline of what happened according to this BBC article. It all started around 11:00 a.m. local time when a 911 call came in reporting an active shooter at the school. But one thing that I thought was really interesting was that the police response was amazingly fast, because it turns out they were training just 3 miles away.
Yeah, that is fascinating. The article highlights how the officers were actually in the middle of an exercise. When that real call came in, it kind of makes you wonder, you know, if that super quick response time actually helped keep the number of casualties down. It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I can only imagine what it must have been like for those officers emotionally. 1 minute you're in a simulation, and the next minute you're facing a real-life nightmare. Chief Barnes is quoted in the article saying, "Every child, every person in that building is a victim and will be a victim forever." There were 15 ambulances that responded to this scene.
Yeah, it's just a scene of absolute chaos and a grim reminder of the scale of these events. But the article also mentions this detail that really stuck with me. The school put out a Facebook post asking for prayers for the Challenger family. I mean, that's their school community. And it just hits you in the gut how personal this is.
It really does. And, you know, this obviously brings up the bigger issue of gun violence here in the U.S. The article cites Education Week as saying that there were already 38 school shootings with casualties in the U.S. this year. Even before this one in Wisconsin, 16 deaths.
Right, and it raises a really important question for us, you know. What are the underlying causes here? What are the common threads, if any, that connect these shootings? It can't just be boiled down to one simple answer.
For sure. The article doesn't really get it political, but it does mention that both Governor Evers and President Biden responded to the shooting. They both expressed their condolences and offered support, but neither really got.
Which is interesting, you know, because, you know, their responses probably reflect their own stances on gun control in general. But for our purposes, you know, let's just try and stick to unpacking the facts of this case and avoid getting bogged down in those partisan arguments.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I mean, this is such a sensitive topic, and we definitely want to, you know, treat it with the respect that it deserves. So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the other details that the BBC article provides about this shooting. And, you know, see if we can maybe start to unpack some of those more complex layers of this really tragic event.
Okay. I think that's a really good approach. We need to try to understand what happened here and why it happened. But we also need to be sensitive to the fact that this is a very raw and painful topic for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. So let's start by talking about the suspect. The article says that he was a student at the school, which I think adds a whole other layer of complexity to this whole thing.
It does. I mean, it's just so hard to fathom. What could possibly drive a teenager to commit such a horrific act against their own school community? The article mentions that. The police haven't released a motive yet, which, you know, is often a key piece in trying to understand these types of events.
I was wondering about that. If there were any warning signs, like did anyone see this coming? And what about the suspect's family? The article mentions that they're cooperating with the investigation.
Right. And that's going to be crucial in piecing together the puzzle of what happened here, the suspect's background, their relationships, their mental health, all of that could provide some really valuable clues. But it's also worth noting, that the suspect's family is going through their own
Immense trauma right now, too.
Yeah. I mean, the ripple effects of this tragedy are going to be felt for years to come. And it's not just the families that are directly involved. This impacts the entire school community, first responders, and even those of us who are trying to process this from afar. Yeah. It's a collective trauma, and it makes you think about how we as a society respond to these events. Do we focus on punishment, rehabilitation, prevention? There are just so many different angles to consider.
And those different angles often lead to some pretty heated debates. We saw that even in the article, the brief mentions of Governor Evers.
And President Biden's responses.
Exactly. Evers talked about prayer and support, while Biden focused on the need for legislative action. And in a way, those responses really encapsulate the two main approaches to gun violence in this country. One is addressing it through individual morality and community support. The other is through systemic change, through policy.
Yeah. And it's interesting because neither approach is necessarily wrong. They both have their merits. But finding common ground between those two perspectives can be incredibly difficult.
It is, especially when emotions are running high. But,
I
think that's where the real work lies, trying to bridge that divide and finding solutions that address the issue from multiple angles, for sure.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take time, but we have to start somewhere.
We do. And I think one place to start is by really understanding the facts. The article dives into some statistics from the K-12 Violence Project, and they've recorded over 300 incidents just this year alone, where a gun was either brandished, fired, or a bullet actually hit school property.
Wow. That's a truly terrifying number. It really shows how widespread this issue is, and it highlights how even if a shooting doesn't result in any casualties, it still creates trauma and fear.
Exactly. It disrupts the learning environment, it erodes trust, and it makes kids feel unsafe in a place where they should feel protected.
Yeah, right. And the article points out that this isn't just a Wisconsin problem. This is happening all over the U.S.
Right. This specific case in Madison is really just part of a much larger national crisis, and it's not going to be solved with one quick fix. We need to be willing to explore different solutions, consider different perspectives, and have those difficult conversations.
Yeah. I'm curious, what are some of the most promising approaches to preventing school shootings that you've come across in your research? Are there any models or strategies that stand out?
Well, one interesting model is something called threat assessment. It's a proactive approach where schools actually create teams that are specifically trained to identify and assess potential threats.
So instead of just reacting after a shooting happens, they're trying to intervene early.
Exactly. They look for warning signs, they gather information from multiple sources, and they develop individualized plans to address the needs of students who might be at risk.
That sounds promising, but I imagine it's pretty resource intensive. Not every school district might have the funding for that.
That's true. Funding for mental health services in schools is often inadequate. And that's another key piece of the puzzle, making sure that students have access to the support they need.
Right. It goes back to that idea of addressing the underlying causes of violence, not just the symptoms. If a student is struggling with mental health issues, or if they're feeling isolated and hopeless, they might be more susceptible to extreme behavior.
Exactly. So investing in those mental health services, creating supportive school environments, and teaching kids conflict resolution skills, those are all crucial pieces
of the puzzle. It sounds like there's no single solution, but rather a combination of strategies that need to work together.
Precisely. We need a multi-pronged approach that addresses individual needs, strengthens community support, and implements some really smart policies.
It's a lot to take on, but it's also a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent.
Absolutely. The stakes are too high. We have to keep pushing for change, keep demanding action, and keep working towards a future where these tragedies are no longer the norm.
As we're discussing solutions, I keep thinking back to that detail about the police training center being so close to the school. Could that be a model for other communities?
It's an interesting thought. Imagine if every community had law enforcement training facilities that were strategically located near schools. It could potentially reduce response times significantly.
And that could be crucial in minimizing casualties. The article highlighted how the officers were able to respond almost immediately because they were already in training mode.
Right. It raises the question, of whether investing in those localized training facilities could be a worthwhile preventative measure.
It's definitely something to consider. It might not prevent every shooting,
Yeah.
but it could potentially save lives.
And that's what it's all about ultimately, finding ways to make our schools safer, to protect our children, and to prevent these horrific tragedies from happening again.
The article also mentions a reunification center being set up for families. It's hard to imagine the agony those parents must have gone through, not knowing if their child was safe.
Yeah. It's a scene that plays out far too often in our country. The frantic search for information.
Yeah.
The desperate hope that their child is okay. It's just a nightmare scenario.
Yeah. And the article doesn't mention any specifics about the victims. But we know a teacher and a teenage student were killed. Plus, several others were injured.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of these tragedies. You know, behind the statistics, behind the headlines, there are real people, real lives that have been shattered.
And the impact ripples outward, affecting families, friends, and entire communities.
Absolutely. It's a collective trauma that we need to acknowledge, to grieve, and to heal from.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of this problem, but we can't give up hope. We have to keep searching for solutions, keep demanding change, and keep fighting for a better future.
You're absolutely right. We owe it to the victims, to their families, and to future generations to create a world where these tragedies are no longer the norm.
I'm curious, what are some of the challenges that you've encountered in trying to understand and address this issue of gun violence in America?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the sheer complexity of the issue. There's no single root cause, no silver bullet solution. It's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted approach.
So it's not just about gun control.
Right. It's about mental health. It's about poverty and inequality. It's about social isolation and lack of opportunity. It's about cultural norms that glorify violence. It's all interconnected.
And that interconnectedness makes it difficult to find solutions that everyone can agree on.
Absolutely. The political climate in the U.S., especially around guns, is extremely polarized. There's a lot of entrenched ideology on both sides. And it can be difficult to have those nuanced, evidence-based conversations.
So how do we move forward? How do we break through those ideological barriers and start having those productive conversations?
I think it starts with building empathy. It's about listening to people's stories, understanding their perspectives, and trying to find common ground.
That's easy to say, but harder to do in practice, especially when there's so much pain and anger on all sides.
I agree. It's not easy, but it's necessary. We have to find a way to move beyond the rhetoric, the finger-pointing, and the blame game.
So how do we do that? How do we start building those bridges?
I think it starts with small, individual acts of kindness. It's about reaching out to people who are different from us, having those difficult conversations, and trying to see the world through each other's eyes.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. We're all part of the same human family, and we need to start acting like it.
And that means being willing to compromise, to listen, and to learn from each other.
It means setting aside our egos and our preconceived notions and approaching these issues with humility and compassion.
It's a tall order, but it's also the only way forward.
I agree. We can't afford to give up hope. We have to keep fighting for a better future, for ourselves, for our children, and for all of humanity.
As we're talking about the need for empathy, I keep coming back to that detail in the article about the school's Facebook post, asking for prayers for the Challenger family.
It's a poignant reminder that this tragedy goes far beyond just statistics and headlines. It's about real people, real families, real communities that have been shattered by this act of violence.
It's easy to get caught up in the political debates and the policy discussions, but we can't lose sight of the human cost.
You're absolutely right. We need to remember that. Behind every number, behind every statistic, there are faces, there are names, there are stories.
And each one of those stories deserves to be heard, to be honored, and to be remembered.
It's a sobering reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment.
And it's a call to action. We can't just sit back and wait for things to change. We have to be proactive. We have to be engaged. And we have to be the change we want to see in the world.
Absolutely. We need to be. The light in the darkness, the hope in the midst of despair.
The article mentions that there's no ongoing threat to other schools or the community, which is somewhat reassuring.
It is. It allows the community to begin the healing process, to grieve, and to start rebuilding.
But it doesn't erase the trauma, the fear and anxiety that these events generate. can linger for a long time.
You're right. It's important to acknowledge that trauma and to provide support for those who are struggling.
We need to be there for each other, to listen, to offer comfort, and to help each other heal.
We need to create a culture of compassion and understanding where people feel safe to share their pain and to seek help without shame or judgment.
And we need to be patient. Healing takes time. It's not a linear process. There will be setbacks. There will be challenges.
But with support, with love, and with hope, we can get through this together.
The article states that roads around the school remain closed. As the investigation continues, it's a visual reminder that this tragedy is still unfolding.
It is, and it's going to take time to gather all the facts, to piece together the puzzle of what happened, and to try to make sense of this senseless act.
And while the investigation is important, it's also crucial that we don't get lost in the details. We need to keep the focus on the human impact, on the lives that have been lost, and on the need for healing and prevention.
You're right. We can't let the search for answers overshadow the need for compassion and support.
It's a delicate balance. We need to seek justice, but we also need to promote healing.
And we need to learn from this tragedy. We need to examine the factors that contributed to this event and work to prevent future tragedies from happening.
It's a daunting task,
Yeah,
but it's one that we can't afford to shy away from.
absolutely. We owe it to ourselves, to our children, and to future generations to create a world where these tragedies are no longer the norm.
The article mentions that the shooting was confined to one space within the school, though it doesn't specify whether it was a classroom or a hallway.
Yeah, that detail, while seemingly minor, could be crucial in understanding the sequence of events and how the tragedy unfolded.
It could also provide insights into the suspects' movements, their state of mind, and their potential motive.
Exactly. Every piece of information, every detail could be a clue that helps us piece together the puzzle of what happened and why.
And while the investigation will likely provide some answers, it's important to remember that we may never fully understand the depths of the suspects' despair or the motivations behind their actions.
That's true. And sometimes, the search for answers can lead to more questions than it resolves.
But even in the face of uncertainty, we can't give up on the pursuit of knowledge, understanding, and prevention.
Absolutely. We have to keep asking questions, keep seeking answers, and keep working towards a future where these tragedies are no longer part of our reality.
The article quotes Chief Barnes as saying, "We have to do a better job in our community." That's a statement that seems to resonate with a lot of people. What do you think he meant by that?
I think he was acknowledging that this tragedy isn't just about one individual, one school, or one community. It's a reflection of a larger societal issue, that we all have a role in addressing...
Shook a call for collective responsibility.
Exactly. It's a recognition that we can't just point fingers or blame others. We all have a part to play in creating a safer, more compassionate, and more just society.
It's about looking inward, examining our own biases, and challenging the systems and structures that perpetuate violence and inequality.
It's about having those difficult conversations, listening to different perspectives, and working together to find common ground.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that the well-being of one depends on the well-being of all.
It's about building a world where every child feels safe, supported, and loved.
It's a tall order, but it's one
Yeah,
that we can't afford to ignore.
absolutely. The stakes are too high. We have to keep fighting for a better future, for ourselves, for our children, and for all of humanity.
The article mentions that Governor Evers has ordered flags to be flown at half-staff in honor of the victims. It's a symbolic gesture, but it's also a reminder that this tragedy is being felt across the state.
It is. And it's a way for people to express their grief, their solidarity, and their support for the community that's been affected.
It's also a reminder that these tragedies have a ripple effect. They impact not just the immediate victims and their families, but also the wider community, the state, and even the nation.
Exactly. It's a collective trauma that we all need to process and heal from.
And it's a reminder that we're all in this together. We need to support each other, to offer compassion and understanding, and to work together to prevent these tragedies from happening again.
One thing that stands out to me is the article's emphasis on the quick police response.
Right. They were training just 3 miles away. It's almost hard to believe it was just a coincidence.
It does make you wonder, though, If there are any lessons to be learned there, could this be a model for other communities? Should we be thinking about strategically locating law enforcement training facilities near schools?
That's an interesting thought. It might not be feasible everywhere, but it's definitely worth exploring. If it could potentially save lives, it's something we need to consider.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the broader need for preparedness and proactive measures. How can we as a society be more proactive in preventing these tragedies? What systems can we put in place to identify warning signs and intervene early?
Those are tough questions.
Yeah.
But they're ones we need to be asking.
We do. And it's not just about law enforcement or security measures. It's about creating a culture of support where people feel comfortable reaching out for help when they need it.
It's about addressing the underlying social and economic factors that contribute to violence. It's about fostering empathy, understanding, and respect for all.
It's a long-term project, a cultural shift. That will take time and effort, but it's a project that we need to embark on for the sake of our children, our communities, and our future.
And one of the most challenging aspects of this tragedy is the lack of a clear motive. The article mentions that. Police haven't identified one yet.
That's a common thread in many of these cases. It's human nature, you know, to want to understand why, to search for a reason that can explain the inexplicable.
But sometimes there is no simple answer, and that can be incredibly frustrating.
It can. It can leave us feeling helpless, angry, and confused. But it's important to remember that even in the absence of a clear motive, we can still learn from these tragedies.
We can study the patterns, we can identify the risk factors, and we can work to create systems and strategies that prevent future tragedies from happening.
Exactly. We can't let the lack of a clear motive paralyze us. We have to keep searching for answers, keep pushing for change, and keep believing that a better future is possible.
You know, as we're talking about the search for answers, I keep thinking about that detail in the article about the school's Facebook post asking for prayers for the Challenger family.
It's a poignant detail that really encapsulates the human impact of this tragedy.
It's a reminder that this isn't just a news story. It's not just a statistic. It's not just a political debate.
It's about real people, real families, real communities that have been shattered by this act of violence.
And it's a call to action. We can't let this tragedy fade from memory. We have to keep the conversation going. We have to keep demanding change. And we have to keep working towards a future where these events are no longer the norm.
Absolutely. We owe it to the victims, to their families, expert speaker, to their families and to future generations to create a world where these events are no longer the norm.
It's interesting, though, how even in the face of such a horrific event, you can already see the beginnings of those political fault lines we were talking about earlier. The article mentions how Governor Evers called for prayers and unity, while President Biden's statement emphasized the need for legislative action on gun control.
Yeah, it just highlights how these tragedies often become lightning rods for pre-existing political debates. And it is tricky, you know, because on the one hand, people are looking for immediate solutions for somebody to do something to prevent this from ever happening again. But at the same time, complex issues like gun violence rarely have those easy, universally agreed upon answers.
It's that balance, isn't it, between the emotional, immediate need for action and the understanding that long-term change requires logical, multifaceted solutions.
Exactly. And it's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric, the finger-pointing, the calls for simple solutions that might not actually address those root causes.
Yeah. Let's step back from that for a moment and look at what the data tells us. The article mentions that even before this shooting, Education Week had already recorded 38 school shootings with casualties in the U.S. this year.
Yeah. It's a sobering statistic, and it really underscores the fact that this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern, a disturbing trend that demands our attention and our action.
And to think, that number only includes shootings with casualties. The K-12 Violence Project, which the article also cites, has logged over 300 incidents involving guns on school grounds this year. And that's any incident where a gun was present, even if no one was hurt.
Right, which really points to a much broader issue of how guns are impacting the learning environment, even beyond that immediate threat of violence. How can kids focus on learning? How can teachers feel safe doing their jobs when there's this constant underlying anxiety?
That's a really good point. It's about the erosion of trust, the disruption of normalcy, the sense of fear that permeates, even when no shots are fired.
Precisely. And it's a reminder that we can't just focus on those dramatic high-profile shootings. We need to address the entire spectrum of gun-related incidents if we truly want to make schools safer,
The article goes into some detail
Yeah.
about the scene at the school, too.
Yeah.
Imagine 15 ambulances responding to that call. And the article talks about a reunification center being set up for families. It just paints this picture of utter chaos and heartbreak.
It's devastating, and those details really bring home the human cost of this tragedy. You know, it's not just about numbers. It's about the individual lives that are forever altered, the families left to grieve, the community left to grapple with the aftermath.
Yeah, and it makes you think about those first responders, too, the police officers, the EMTs, the firefighters who rush into these situations. I mean, they're dealing with trauma on a daily basis.
That's so true. We often forget about the toll these events take on the people who are tasked with responding to them. They're human beings, too, and they deserve our support and our appreciation.
Absolutely. Their jobs are incredibly demanding,
Yeah.
both physically and emotionally.
Right, and they often don't get the recognition or the resources they need to deal with the long-term effects of these experiences.
I want to go back to Chief Barnes's quote that we have to do a better job in our community. I mean, it's such a simple statement, yet it's so loaded. What do you make of it?
You know, it strikes me as a call for collective accountability. He's not just pointing fingers at law enforcement or policymakers. He's acknowledging that this is a societal issue, a shared responsibility that requires us all to look inward and ask ourselves, what can I do to make things better?
It's about going beyond thoughts and prayers, isn't it? It's about taking concrete actions, making real changes in our own lives and in our communities.
Exactly. It's about fostering empathy, understanding, and a willingness to have those difficult conversations, even when they make us uncomfortable.
And it's about recognizing that. There's no single solution, no silver bullet that will fix this problem overnight. It's going to take a long-term, sustained effort to address the root causes of violence.
You're right, and it's going to require collaboration, compromise, and a willingness to see things from different perspectives.
This deep dive has been a reminder that knowledge is the first step towards change by understanding the facts, analyzing the data, and engaging in these difficult conversations. We can empower ourselves to make a difference.
Absolutely. We can't let ignorance or apathy be our response to these tragedies. We have to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.
And remember, that school's Facebook post asking for prayers for the Challenger family. It's a reminder that at the heart of this tragedy, there's a community that needs our support, our compassion, and our solidarity.
Beautifully said. Let's keep them in our thoughts as we continue to grapple with this issue and work towards creating a world where these events are no longer the norm.
It's tough to hear about these things and not feel completely helpless.
I know what you mean. I mean, it's easy to get stuck in that cycle of outrage and grief and just feel like nothing's ever going to change.
But then I think about that detail from the article about the school's Facebook post, you know, the one asking for prayers for the Challenger family.
Right. It's a small detail, but it really speaks volumes about the strength and resilience of this community.
It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's still hope, there's still love, and there's still a deep sense of connection that binds us together.
And that's what we need to hold on to, that sense of connection, that belief that we're not alone in this, that we can support each other, and that we can work together to create a better future.
It's not going to be easy, but it's a fight worth fighting.
It is.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the Madison school shooting.
Yeah, it's been a tough one. But I think it's important that we have these conversations, even when they're difficult.
Absolutely. We need to keep shining a light on this issue and keep pushing for change. Thank you for joining us, and please, take care of yourselves out there.
Yes. And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling, there are resources available. Don't hesitate to reach out for help.
Thanks for joining us on today's deep dive into this topic. The conversation doesn't end here. We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts or insights? Don't forget to like this video if you found it insightful. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Hit the bell icon to never miss an update. Subscribe for more news and in-depth analysis. Stay informed, stay engaged. This is Global Insight News. Until next time, take care.